Hello, welcome back to the Living Process. My name is Greg Madison, and today my guest is Peter Gill. Peter is very well known in the UK as a focusing teacher, a coordinator. He's known for doing various workshops on particular topics. We talk about some of those in this episode, and we also talk quite a bit about his new book, which is a really fantastic new introduction to focusing, written in a slightly different way than some of the other introductions. I found it really accessible, and hopefully it'll have a wide audience outside of the focusing world and bring some new people into this practice that we all value. In the episode, we talk a little bit about Peter's interest in and work on grief and contemplating death, and his work that he's continuing to do on nature connection and the environmental crisis. Also, we speak a little bit about his training in somatic experiencing and how it goes with focusing and how it may in some ways be slightly different and the reasons that he started that training. For me, it was a really engaging conversation. Found some of it quite moving. And yeah, I hope you enjoy it. The Living Process with Peter Gill. Thank you. So I'm very pleased to welcome Peter today. And I know that you have just released your book about a month ago or even less.
Yeah. Literally a month today. Yeah.
A month today. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. The first month anniversary.
That's right. Yeah.
But before we get into that, I would be curious just to know a little bit about how you found your way into focusing and sort of just, practicing it, teaching it, that kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah. So back in 2003, the early part of that year, my mum had died, and later, 6 months later, I found myself on a retreat, so a 2-week meditation retreat. And yeah, and unsurprisingly, it wasn't very easy to be there. I was really sort of struggling with feelings of being overwhelmed by grief, and it was just it was difficult. And the teacher on the retreat said to me, he said, "Oh, have you ever heard of focusing?" And I'm like, "No." He said, "Oh, it's about listening to the body." And I kind of went, "Okay," and didn't really think much of it. I mean, I guess it piqued a little bit of interest. But then that night, I had this amazing dream. One of those big dreams we don't come very often, and you think, wow, that was important. But the most important bit was I woke up from that dream in the middle of the night with the word focusing, just like reverberating. I was saying that I said this on the book launch. It was the only time, when we asked for a sign, when you asked for a sign, and it came, and it really did come. Like, oh, I need to learn that. I just knew I needed to learn it. This is like 3 a.m. So the next morning, I went to the teacher and said, "Oh, can I see that book?" Because he mentioned Anne's book, and he gave me Anne's book to read, The Power of Focusing, which I read in one afternoon. Completely devoured it, and just knew at once that it was an essential piece of what I needed.
It's interesting that it's somehow the little that he said about it was enough
That's
for
right.
it to sort of go in and touch something.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's interesting, isn't it? It was just those few words of something like listening to the body,
Yeah.
and yeah, it touched something very deep. And I guess maybe as a little bit of background, I guess I spent quite a lot of time doing meditation prior to that. 10 years, maybe 15 years, I can't remember exactly, and a lot of that time, I in a way wasn't really listening to my body. I mean, that's not really how meditation should be practiced, I believe, but how I was doing it was a very mental sort of
Right.
kind of way of doing it, trying to sort of think myself into a better state, almost concentrate myself into a better way, and kind of ignoring my body apart from being comfortable, just ignoring what was going on. If it was anxious, I'd try and sort of counteract it in some way, or So I think his sentence turned everything around. Like, oh right, I have a body, and it's not something I should ignore. It's something, well, that I should listen to. It has something to say, even, So that, yeah, it was quite a turning around. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
I guess I'm thinking that somehow you were ready.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Mm.
Maybe the recent passing of your mother was a part of that or
I think
whatever.
so. Yeah. Oh, very much so. Ready. Yeah. 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 Exactly.
So what happened next? How did you, yeah, carry it forward?
Yeah. So then, yeah. So I've read that book, and I guess there's only a book has, as we might even speak about, book has a sort of limited amount of. It's a great way in, but I needed to practice it. So I looked up a local teacher. I was in London at the time, and Peter Afford was my
Hmm.
local teacher, and I just went on a workshop with him, and I knew on the first workshop, oh, I want to teach this. Just straight away, I knew, very clearly. I mean, I've been teaching meditation and Buddhism for years, and
Yeah.
I got quite comfortable in that teaching role, but it was like, this is what I want to teach. I loved it, absolutely loved it. I loved that it wasn't spiritual, if you feel what I mean, explicitly. I loved that it was, yeah, it was kind of, yeah, well, so many things about it, really. It's empathy, the gentleness, well, yeah. So I knew immediately I wanted to do that. Yeah. And kind of started to do that, actually. I mean, that's even though I wasn't qualified, within maybe 2 or 3 workshops, I was beginning to weave it into how I taught meditation and
Hmm.
doing little intros here and there. Yeah.
The impression I get as I listen to you is um, because some people come across focusing and they really struggle.
Yeah.
And I'm not hearing that so much from you that even if you hadn't been paying attention to your body, somehow
Yeah.
it was such a natural fit for you.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I suppose the word, I guess I still struggle. Not, I didn't struggle with it with the practice of it. I mean, I met areas of struggle, if you know what I mean, areas of
Yeah,
trauma where it was hard to go,
yeah,
but yeah, it was revelatory, as I say, to kind of go, oh right, now because I spent so much time in my head, so much time overthinking and getting anxious and obsessive thoughts, and prior to that it was such a joy to find a different way of being where it wasn't just constant kind of rumination, but like,
yeah,
so yeah, it was in a way quite accessible, and yeah, I don't think I do find it quite accessible. It might, if something speaks quite easily to me in the
yeah,
practice, yeah.
yeah,
So, and
yeah,
I know, definitely know that's not the case for some people. All the people I've taught over the years, it's
yeah,
can be a lot harder.
yeah.
You
So I know that over the years you've taught a lot and you taught for a while with Anne and Barbara.
I've done well. I've assisted them a lot on their
Yeah.
retreats, and yeah, I've taught like a few courses, 3 courses with Anne as well, co-teaching a few
Okay.
years back. Yeah,
Yeah. And you have your own workshops.
that's right.
And now you have this book.
That's right.
And it's interesting to me because I used to think on occasion, there needs to be another introduction to focusing book
Yeah,
somewhere.
yeah, that's right.
Um, but I never thought further. I think because I didn't know how to do it, I didn't know what I thought maybe needed to be done slightly differently or to
Yeah.
target it somehow differently. Um, so I'm curious why you decided to take it on. And I'm not even sure you would call it an introduction to focusing book because it's slightly different than that, maybe.
I guess yeah, it is. It's that's one of its places. I think it
Yeah.
holds as a doorway into focusing. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but I don't think it's just that.
No.
Uh, yeah. Um, yeah. I suppose I was holding both this awareness of how powerful it was for me to read Anne's book, The
Yeah.
Power of Focusing, and that was, I don't know when that was written, 95 or something. But it kind of had a sense it needed something like that needed updating as well. So a sort of a feeling of a fresher voice or something on it.
Mhm.
Because even how she teaches it has changed in those times. So I had a sense, yeah, there weren't many introductory books on focusing. There aren't really. I mean, there's Gentle's book, which in a way some people say, and he even says, I believe, it's not the best introduction. And then there's Anne's book, and there's a few other pieces here and there, but it definitely. And whereas you look at, and what I did see, I looked around me around mindfulness. So many books on mindfulness, for example.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought there must be another room, must be room for another book on focusing,
Hmm.
introducing it. So yeah, I really did want to speak to people who didn't know anything about the practice, and in a way without even referring to it as focusing very much,
Yeah.
just to sort of yeah, more just evoking what it can bring you, this way of being. Um,
Yeah. It that
yeah, that's kind
my
of what the aim of it. Yeah.
yeah, my I mean I love the book. I thought it somehow offered people a way in, I think, from their lives, rather than
Mm,
kind of giving them some teaching
right.
that they have to learn in order to get a way in.
Mm.
But you also did some other things in it. So I'm curious if this is part of what you wanted to include that maybe hadn't been included before, because you take a lot of topics and just kind of briefly sort of
Hmm.
make a bridge to them.
That's
But
right.
the other thing that I was struck by is that you were quite personal in it.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm wondering if that was a conscious choice to include sort of more of just your own experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. I mean, I guess yeah, it's trying to speak about it from the inside in a way, and
Hmm.
how it's affected, how it's brought changes in my own life, and how I use and used it, if you like,
Yeah.
how I live it. I mean, that's the kind of because that's a real one, a big part of it is communicating that it's not just this practice I do over here.
Hmm.
You'll do once a week with a partner or twice a week or something. It's a way of, in some ways, a way of living. I mean, even that doesn't quite, but I'm sure you get what I mean. It's not,
Yeah.
it lives inside everything one does once you get it, or it can do. It doesn't
Yeah.
provide an answer to everything. It's not a complete recipe for all of life, but yeah, it sort of weaves into so many things. And I guess I wanted to communicate that.
Uh,
Yeah.
That's an interesting point because I think that's what I was picking up, but I hadn't realized until just now what it was.
Hmm.
Um, when I first learned focusing, I learned it from Gendlin's book and
Mm.
practiced on my own. And
Right.
there's so little discussion of focusing alone
Yeah,
or sort of focusing as a practice just in your daily life.
that's right. That's yeah.
Gendlin mentioned it a bit in his book. But I felt like your book did that. It kind of showed the reader a way of integrating it for themselves. You didn't have to have a partner. You didn't
Yeah.
have to have a teacher. You didn't have to go to workshops.
Yes.
And maybe that's one of the unique things about your book.
Yeah, right. I mean, it will be interesting to see if it fulfills that, I mean, role, if you like, of
Mm.
sort of because so far, most of the feedback I'm getting about the book is from people within the focusing community and my friends and people who know me, and it's great. It's all very good feedback, and I'm very thankful of it. And I was really sort of wanting to write beyond that too, so people just would pick it up and go, "Wow, what is this? What is this way of being?" And yeah, I guess yeah, really feel that it's something that they could have in their lives, accessible all the time in some way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, rather than yeah, like something you have to go and find a partner for. I mean, it does mention that in the book, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, what was it like to write the book?
It was actually, yeah, it was mostly the writing part was in a way one of the easiest bits of it. I gave myself a couple, well, sort of, I guess I had three chunks of writing, and two of those are mostly around the sort of lockdown period. And I just went away to a friend's shed locally and hid away from sort of 9 to 5 every day and turned my phone off and just let it just come out.
Mhm.
Uh, let the sequence kind of unfold a bit. And so that was the main bits of writing. And then I had already written quite a lot of blog posts and articles around some of those topics that appear in the part two of the book. So half of those were sort of pre-written over the years. So kind
Okay.
of brought those together. But yeah, the writing part, I loved doing that. I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, maybe we could talk a bit about a couple of the topics.
Yeah, please. Yeah, it'd be great.
Um, I'll maybe I'll mention a couple of the ones that I found
Mm.
interesting and that I'd like to hear more about.
Yeah, yeah.
And then maybe you could mention if there's any ones that you're particularly passionate about.
Hmm.
But the ones that I was interested in were topics of um, kind of around grief.
Hmm.
And
Mm.
I know that you've done workshops kind of around grief and sort of a focusing way of contemplating death. And I would really
Hmm.
like to hear more about that.
Hmm. Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because as you were sort of evoking that, of course, I remembered what I just started a conversation with. Our conversation around that was kind of grief was a sort of,
Yeah.
I was in that deep space of grief when I discovered focusing. I just thought, wow, it's interesting. It's sort of, yeah, I mean, for me, I guess one of the like I say in my book, it's an enduring theme that comes again and again and again. This that when we make space for what wants attention, I love that invitation. What wants attention in focusing? You let go of your sort of controlling process, if you like, let go of the reins of all that we normally do, and just open the door, invite what wants attention. What comes is what hasn't had attention, and what hasn't had attention that is so often grief, so often, or themes around it, around loss, around uh yeah, grief isn't really allowed to flow in our culture, or be seen very easily. So it sort of gets left at the sidelines, or completely exiled. So we make this invitation, what wants attention? And yeah, there it comes, and again I've seen it. And it's something very real and very moving about
Mm-hmm.
seeing it be allowed for the first time in my own process, and seeing it with other people as well. There's something, it seems so essential and needed. Yeah.
It's interesting. As you say that, I can feel something in me kind of comes
Mm.
into my awareness. And it suddenly makes me wonder, and I don't know why I haven't wondered this before, of what is it about a human life that grief is so central?
Mm.
Because I suspect when you're using that word, you're not talking just about the death of another person, or
Yeah, yeah,
it's more general than that.
definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're wondering again?
I'm wondering what makes it so central. And I'm
Yeah,
also wondering, th- since it's so central, why is it also so ignored?
yeah. Yeah. I met what comes to mind is David White, the poet. He says, half of life is loss and disappear. Half of life is loss and disappearance. When I heard that, blimey, half of life. Like, it's not
Yeah.
just a little bit. It's half
Yeah.
of life is
Mm.
loss and disappearance, and
Yeah.
it really struck me. And then you look around, and how so little of it is visible. So yeah, so I think it's essential because it is half of life.
Mhm.
And the other side of the coin of, yeah, emergence and living and joy is loss and disappearance somehow. So there's that. And then yeah, I do resonate with this. I think I might have come across it with from Stephen Jenkinson or something. He's someone who I have listened to quite a bit. He's done a lot of work with the dying, and he talks about, yeah, like a death phobic and a grief phobic culture. So we live in a culture that's scared of it, avoids it completely. So, but then if it's half of life, then you can see where we end up in this tangle.
Yeah.
This sort of, yeah, it's a big theme. And yeah, I actually would love to return to it more fully. You
Mhm.
know, because I used to offer grief ceremonies with some local people, and so really making a sort of ceremonial space for grief.
Mhm.
That was and I really loved that, and that kind of faded away for one reason or another. But yeah, it comes back to me again and again how central it is. People write to me and say, "Oh, do you do grief workshops?" I'm like, not very often these days, but it's a calling I haven't got the space for right now. But to make a place where it's really welcomed. But we can do that. But I guess what I could say, we can do that. We can do that in focusing in a
Yeah.
partnership or in our own solo. We make a space, we welcome it,
Yeah.
and it really wants to be welcomed. just as it
Yes.
is. There's something about that. It doesn't want any meddling.
Yeah.
It just wants to be felt.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's as I'm listening to you, I'm sort of reflecting on the grief that comes up for me and often not being able to name the source of it.
Mm,
It's not as though something tragic has just happened, and of course I'm
yes.
grieving.
Yeah,
Sometimes I just go into my body and there it is, and I think, well, why is
exactly.
that there?
Yeah, yeah, that's
And
right.
it's almost like there's something about the living process itself that
Mm,
entails this constant letting go and
yeah,
losing things,
yeah,
as well as, I mean, we always emphasize on focusing the carrying forward, but maybe we
yeah,
should
wow.
also balance that with the letting go.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and maybe that is a kind of carrying forward in a certain way,
Yeah.
in a certain sort of way, yeah. I don't know what that somehow makes sense to me when I say it,
Yeah,
but yeah,
they imply each other. They aren't
yes,
two separate acts.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I appreciate you name, yeah, griefs that are unnameable. If you, I mean, yeah, it's not just the more obvious ones that
Yeah, yeah,
I
exactly.
speak to. Yeah, and sometimes when I've taken that, yeah, that curiosity, sometimes they do become more nameable, and sometimes they don't too.
Yeah.
But the fact that I could name, this grief is about, not being welcomed in a community, for
Hmm.
example.
Hmm.
I mean, that's a sort of shorthand, but the sense of, or around not belonging, or what's happening to a natural world. Like those are griefs that before remained unfelt but unnameable,
Yeah.
and definitely, yeah, giving them space has allowed them to be heard somehow and
Yeah.
articulated. Yeah,
You can acknowledge at least some of the actual situations that are
yeah, that's
kind of
right.
creating it.
Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah,
But can I just ask, um, the more obvious one, of course, is death.
yeah.
And I know that you've done some workshops around that. I'm just curious what you do in those workshops.
Yeah, well, I mean, the main, the main strange, well, I call it strange, but is, I guess, firstly, just creating a bit of a sort of clearing a space a little bit for kind of bringing in the topic safely, and the topic being our own death, our
Hmm.
contemplating, but not contemplating it from a sort of thinking point of view, but what does our body know about it,
Yeah.
or our being? I mean, it's a good body, but what? And that's always been incredibly surprising and actually very enlivening and somehow, yeah, and deeply reassuring so far. I mean, because often when we think of death, we like I had heard recently of someone I knew was dying of cancer, and like, I get this rush of sort of fear in my body. Like, I don't want to, well, I actually don't want to have that happen to me or anyone I know. But so, yeah, but when I examine that more closely, it's that is around, yeah, suffering. It's around loss of family but the actual sort of stepping over that threshold,
Hmm.
or being carried over that threshold into death, when I've contemplated that, feels kind of different. It isn't, well, I don't know. I haven't been there, but I mean, the experience of contemplating it in an embodied way feels different. Something else comes. Like, I do sense that the body knows something. There is another knowing about it, because I don't know if that's part of what living is
Yeah.
every living organism is involved in that process. It's the next step, and whatever is beyond that, it's sort of somehow we can't. It's woven into our life. I mean, it's mysterious, isn't it? But
Yeah.
so I find it very exciting and enlivening to do that contemplation with people. Um, I haven't done one for a while, but yeah, it takes a bit of courage to step towards that.
Yeah. It's it's a big interest of mine.
Hmm.
And many years ago, when I first got into focusing and I was focusing on my own, I would consciously contemplate my own death
Oh, well, okay, yeah,
for this reason, to sort of
yeah,
see what does my body know about
yeah,
this. Death is such an abstract concept.
exactly. Yes,
So
yeah.
easy to talk about and oh, everybody's going to die and blah blah.
Hmm.
But to take it to the body and ask, what does my organism or my being know about its own demise?
Yeah, right.
Um, I got out of the practice of it, and I think that's partly why I'm
Mm,
interested in asking you about it, because
mm,
I want to get back into that practice at
yeah.
this point in my life. It feels like it's a more urgent
Fair enough. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
in some
exactly.
way.
It's
Um,
closer. Yeah.
it is closer. And yeah, it's a very complicated thing, I think, because so many
Mm,
things get thrown into that bucket called death,
that's
like,
right.
fear of illness or pain or saying goodbye to people, and
Mm,
the actual act of the body
yeah.
disintegrating into space experientially, or whatever happens, who knows what happens.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, that part of it, if I imagine that part of it, and if I ask my body about that part of it, it seems to sort of relax and expand slightly. It
Yeah,
doesn't,
yeah.
yeah,
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. I'm glad you said that. I was going to ask you how you experienced it a bit. Yeah, that's been my something of the quality that I've experienced. Um, but touching on that earlier conversation, one of the reasons why it gets complex is because, we might have experienced traumatic deaths, you
yeah.
sort of, yeah, there's a lot of other things come into it,
Hmm.
and how death is treated medically, for example, and
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot I could say about that. But yes, yeah, but it's just that the sort of something about that simple invitation. What does it know about that process?
Yeah.
Hmm, yeah.
Can I ask you, do you, during the years of focusing and perhaps meditation as well,
Mhm.
has your uh, understanding or expectation or belief around death evolved at all or changed?
Yeah, well, in change in the way we just described, really, in that my yeah, that threshold doesn't feel scary to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas or well, let's say to all of me, I think there are. I mean, I think I tell this story in the book. There are kind of parts that maybe we can some that's sort of the language that fits, but there are kind of reactions. I mean, I think there's a very deep sort of physiological response of also not wanting to die. I saw this in my mother's own dying process. There was a wanting to let go, and also a desperate wanting to hold on. Kind
Yeah.
of woven in together, really. So I think that there's a bit of sort of there's a bit of teasing apart in that way as we contemplate it. But no, I've lost the track of your question. But has it changed? Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, I feel less scared of that
Okay.
particular piece of it. Yeah. Um,
Yeah. But when you say about the wanting to hang on,
mm,
that immediately evokes in me just that, well, it's all I've ever known is life.
yeah, that's right. That's right. But I do often find myself thinking, well, I did to look around. I do because I do this
Mhm.
work in nature as well. I look around in the natural world, and that's where everything is heading. I mean, of course,
Yeah.
and the other side of it, everything is is coming into being as well
Hmm.
from that process. So I mean, that's another piece to add into this is that I think through the work in nature that I've done, something I've appreciated something of that whole cycle more fully of birth and death, some kind
Yeah.
of weaving of that's made the whole thing feel much bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask a bit about that? I'm curious because I know you
Mm,
also offer workshops in sort of nature connection and that kind of thing.
that's
You
right.
mentioned it in the book.
Yeah, yeah.
Can you say a bit about that?
Yeah. So in 2000 and I don't know when I guess when the climate crisis was becoming a bit more well known.
Mhm.
Well, it's been around for a long time, hasn't it? Really, decades, in fact. But in terms of more popular, sort of getting into the more popular consciousness, so what do I do? I knew I wanted to do something. Well, how do I respond to this? And yeah, I guess what came to me is I wanted to learn to love nature. if I love nature more, then I'll take care of it more, something like that. And this is another one of those moments where, serendipity, a bit like focusing. I had this phrase come to my mind, call of the wild, call of the wild. And I just put it in the search engine, put it into Google, and this course came up that was called Call of the Wild. That's a bit old. And I looked at it, and the course is amazing. It's this 6 weekends throughout the year, and all this mentoring, and it's run down in Devon through an organisation called Wildwise. And yeah, I saved up and signed up, and yeah, transformative. Just to kind of really immerse oneself in building relationships with nature in a very experiential way. It wasn't through theory at all, and mainly through spending time in it. I mean, largely it's just spending time in it in a conscious kind of way. So through that, yeah, what I've also discovered, what I'm discovering still is this. Well, how I like to put it is, yeah, the body is a living system. This vast living system that we're sort of that I spent, yeah, a lot of time prior to that and still do entering. We enter into that landscape and we listen. And then, excuse me, on this trainings, I began to realize, oh, right, I can do that with that living system. That's also a vast living system that I can enter into a relationship to and speaks back. I mean, that was the sort of more surprising piece. It's sort of, anyway, it's obvious in some ways, but it knows I'm here. It speaks back to me in the same way that the body speaks back. Yeah, we have that moment in focusing, don't we, where something sort of says, thank you, or I'm glad you listened. And you sort of, it's an amazing moment. Like, oh, it's speaking to me. Almost, I mean, not, you know what I mean, not in the same words, but you feel it as a separate thing. I think that's an extraordinary moment in focusing. I love it. And then, yeah, that happens outside too, in a different way, in a different kind of way. But you realize there's a living relationship, and it's responding to your attention. And so that's one of the areas of interest I've got is that we can go inside and ask, and something comes, or invite, let's say, and sometimes something comes, and we can go outside, and also something comes back.
I'm curious. I don't feel like I quite get it yet.
Okay.
So I want to ask a little bit more
Sure.
about that.
Yeah, please, yeah.
Where I live surrounded by woods. So I'm out walking in the woods
Yeah.
3 times a day with my dog.
That's right.
And I was thinking about this conversation, and I was thinking, what is Peter talking about
Yeah.
in connecting to nature? And I feel like there's times I can walk through the woods and almost not quite be there.
Oh, yeah.
And
Definitely.
yeah, and often with friends, and we're kind of babbling about this or that. And sometimes I want to say, hey, let's just be here. But I don't usually say that.
Yeah.
But I think that the connection you're talking about, it requires, so correct me if I'm wrong, it requires a conscious intention to be open to your present surroundings.
Definitely, yes.
And then what? Somehow,
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there are kind of forms of practice that enable this. I mean, in a similar way to focusing, in the sense of, you set up or you can at least, focusing has a sort of formal structure. Let's say you can set up a time to do it, or an occasion. You consciously step into that space. Well, the same thing happens you can do with nature. I mean, how I discovered this on the course was what's called a medicine walk. So you're invited to go for a walk for 3 hours with just a question. A question that you would craft, if you like, or form, and then a question that is important to you, and you would step over a threshold, which would this intentional moment, which I find really interesting. It's sort of it could be a device like a threshold, could be a gateway, literally a gateway into a forest or two trees, but you set up intentionally a threshold and step over it with that question, and then you wait and see what comes. Now, that kind of walk could last 3 days, it could last 3 hours, or it could last 20 minutes. I mean, obviously the processes are very different, but something comes when we step into that space. And that's what mirrors very much is sense of focusing. You step into the body, and you wait,
Yeah.
and something comes. But I think they both require some sense of intention, don't they? A conscious decision
Yes.
to sort of show up.
Yeah.
Um, and then you return, you kind of come back, and you take some time in that space, and you come back, and yeah. So does that clarify it a little bit more
Yeah.
what it could be like? Yeah.
As you're saying that, there's two things that come to me. One is, and I think maybe as focusers, we often have this problem, I do at least, is I can't imagine how to do that without focusing.
Yeah, yeah, of course, yeah,
I'm thinking,
yeah.
how would a non-focuser do that? Um,
Wow, isn't it interesting? Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. The
yeah,
process clearly works. Whether I saw
yeah,
that with people, and of course, I couldn't not do it in a focusing way.
yeah.
At
It
a certain
requires something like focusing, whether you know focusing or not.
Yeah, yeah, yes, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Some kind of checking inside and resonating with what's coming, and
Yeah,
some kind of listening, a kind of listening. Yeah, embodies a spirit of being of stepping into the unknown and listening.
yes.
Is very much part of focusing. Yeah. Okay.
The other thing that comes to me is just as you're talking, I'm imagining myself in the woods, and that there's something about bringing my attention into my body when I'm in the woods that
Mm,
it's like my body expands into the woods.
definitely.
That there's kind of the distinction between my physical body and the woods becomes very um my body dissipates
Yes.
to some
Yes.
extent. Is that
Yeah. Yeah.
experience that you've had?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Definitely. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Our sense of
So
self changes.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I guess yeah. In some traditions, they could call that your ecological self or something. In sort of
Mm.
that's sort of that's a name for it. But that's yeah. We I mean, Gentlin talks about this being we experience. The body is part of a bigger system, and I think that's
Mhm.
one dimension of what he's speaking of. And it's not separate from that. And you really begin to feel it, don't you, when you pause and pay attention in a natural environment like that.
It's
Yes, yeah.
yeah, it's bringing back to mind the work on deep ecology
Yes.
years ago.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, and so that was the beginning when you wanted to kind of have some kind of response to the
Mhm, mhm.
environmental crisis was first of all to re-engage in your
Exactly.
connection with nature.
Yes.
And then did you continue in that direction or
Yeah, yeah. So well, I did 2 years of trainings with that organization.
okay, wow.
So and the emphasis really on those trainings was facilitation, was facilitating people's experience of connecting with nature.
Mhm.
Since then, I guess what I'm finding myself, I've also added in last year, I started teaching, well, I started to learn how to hold forest bathing walks, which was all kind of already what I was doing. I mean, I don't like the term forest bathing particularly but forest immersion, that's
Mhm.
forest, being a forest guide. I mean, there's a lot of big, rich tradition of people out there guiding people in the forest in this very intentional way. So that's what I'm completing at the moment, a training in those things, although I've kind of already been doing them already to some extent, but it's more sort of formalizing that process. But yeah, I guess what I love doing is taking people out into nature, whether that's for 3 hours or 3 days, uh, and having them discover this relationship, this possibility that you can. Yeah, the nature isn't just something we sort of trample through and sort of take our
Yeah.
dogs for a walk in, which is lovely, it's great for that. But it's a vast living system which we are participating in,
Yes.
as and has something to say to us, and particularly now, that I think that conversation is sort of deeply needed.
Hmm.
I want to share a story actually. One of the deepest parts of this training I did was a practice called the Council of All Beings. It's a Joanna Macy practice. Joanna Macy's a Buddhist practitioner and activist, and she created this whole body of work called the Work that Reconnects, which is really helping people, activists specifically, kind of connect to, yeah, I guess a bigger picture and to what they love and their values, and kind of become activists from there. And one of the practices is called the Council of All Beings, in you basically ceremonially sort of inhabit another being and speak from that being. So people, so over this weekend, we led towards this sort of ceremony where we wore masks, and I was a sycamore tree, and I spoke from this place of a tree. You know, not in a way thinking it's all a bit goofy and a bit weird beforehand, but then you enter into that ceremonial space, and it was very profound to suddenly speak for another organism that doesn't have a
Yeah.
voice. Well, it doesn't
Yeah.
have a voice in our normal world. Of course, it has a voice. It doesn't have a voice in our not our human-dominated world.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and it touched me very deeply, I suppose, and that I guess that's part that somehow informs this sort of desire to yeah to take myself and other people out into that space again and again. I mean, maybe I'll end up doing kind of like vision quests and those kinds of practices where you go out for a number of days on your own without food. There's it's not something I've done myself yet, so I wouldn't need that, but that might be where it's heading. There's a very big tradition of those kinds of practices out there.
Yeah. As I listen to you, I'm again feeling that grief we were talking
Mm,
about. In the woods where I live, there are so many trees down and
yes, yes, yes.
diseased, and they've
Well,
had to
yeah.
clear out a lot of the woods. And every time I see that or see a tree with its roots kind of
Mm,
exposed, and it feels like um, it feels tragic. It really
yeah.
has a tragic quality to it.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's right. And that point, yeah, it points to something profound when we feel that, doesn't it? When we see, or maybe you can see it on the TV. You might see deforestation or plastic in the ocean or whatever, and somehow we're well, I guess, yeah, it certainly affects me. It affects a lot of people I know. It touches us, doesn't it? And so what I mean, in deep ecology, they would say, or maybe they would say, like, what we do to what we're doing to our environment, in some ways we're doing to ourselves. There's,
Yeah,
there's this connection like that.
exactly.
Yeah.
I'm curious about whether focusing has a larger role in that kind of in the movement
Um,
to save nature.
um, yeah, I'm curious too.
Yeah.
I think whether focusing in the sort of form we might more easily recognize it in terms of sort of partnership practice and teaching, whether that I don't know so sure about, but some of the sort of essentials of focusing or the sort of
Hmm.
sensibilities, I think it could offer us something. I think there's something around how because it's so polarized at the moment around these issues.
Yeah.
Take climate change. It's become this incredibly divisive topic where it's either completely disbelieved or so yeah. I mean, I won't go into all of that, but so those polarizations that exist, I think focusing could help have better conversations about that or some of the skills from focusing. Really rather than just speaking from ideas, speaking from experience, for
Hmm.
example, allowing some of that grief to be felt. I think a lot of these debates are up at this level, aren't they? But when we touch into our body, a whole different truth comes to
Yeah.
light.
Yeah.
So yeah, I hope so. And yeah, I mean, I sort of not very during some of the Extinction Rebellion
Hmm.
campaigns a few years ago. I did try to teach focusing on little workshops in those gatherings and well, at least pieces of it. It never quite caught, but that's okay. I wasn't so I've got a feeling it needs some kind of translation or something else with it or something,
Hmm.
which I haven't got a form for yet. I guess, yeah, focusing is an essential piece, I believe, but whether it's called that in
Yeah.
that particular form, I don't know. Something
I
like that.
now I'm thinking of your book
Yeah, yeah.
because I think maybe it does offer a more subtle way in.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's. I mean, that is the hope
Yeah,
of it. I mean, that's why I didn't call it. That's why focusing isn't in the title.
yeah,
And I don't know how many times the word focusing is even written in the book. Probably a dozen times or something. That word, the way of curiosity,
yeah,
is about being curious, and can we take that curiosity into all dimensions of life? I think that's what I wanted to get across, and how radical that is to really do that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think you talk more about focusing near the end of the book.
Yes, yeah, yeah. I guess
Um,
I'm mentioning it more in the second half, and then
yeah,
there's sort of tying it into some of the pieces at the end. Yes.
yeah, I think that's good. I wanted to also just ask a little bit about your training in somatic experiencing.
Hmm.
And I'm curious, I know other people in focusing in somatic experiencing, it's seems to have become kind of a fairly common
Yes.
cross between the two ways of working. I'm curious about what the attraction is, maybe,
Hmm.
of somatic experiencing for somebody that knows focusing,
Yeah.
and about what got you interested in somatic experiencing as a
Hmm.
focuser. And then I'm also curious about similarities and differences,
Hmm.
and maybe where you are now in terms of integrating the practices.
Yeah, sure. Um, I had known about SE for a long time, yeah, before I embarked on a training. I think that what specifically made me want to train was that I was leading a retreat, a 7-day retreat in focusing, and someone on that retreat had a very difficult experience. Like some very old trauma was re-triggered, and I didn't. I felt out of my depth, frankly, as a facilitator with that person, and I thought, well, I need to find out more about this. I guess what I touched on was my own terror and my own inability to be curious about it at that point. Like it was something like, no, I'm not going there.
Mm.
So I thought, okay, I need to look at this, and signed up on one of one of the few trainings. There weren't very many in those. It was 2013, I think, in London, on the 3-year course. Um, so I think the attraction was sort of, yeah, and I guess came from, yeah, feeling out of my depth and wanting to know more, feeling my own unresolved trauma, but also realizing, oh, I'm going to meet this again and again. I'm sure in facilitating individuals or groups. Um, yeah, so that's how I came across it, and it was quite tough actually, knowing being quite embedded in focusing at that point, learning another methodology that was quite close,
Yeah.
but also very different,
Mhm.
because it was about tracking in the body and being in the present moment and being curious, and like a lot of the qualities cross. And it was also very there was also these differences about where they would kind of direct the practice. I mean, so coming to the question about the differences, I think it's more. What it was one more point I wanted to say. Yeah, one of the other attractions of it, here it is, was when I turned up at the course, one of the first modules, I suddenly thought, oh wow, like trauma is welcomed into this space in the same way that grief was welcomed into grief ceremony. It's like, oh, this is a space where, well, I'm using that term trauma fairly broadly, but those things that we call trauma are kind of actually allowed and welcomed in, rather than something we keep secret and hidden. And
Mhm.
so I think that was attractive. Like there was a sense of, oh, this is a place where people want to know about that. And those parts of us, of course, that have been through it start to wake up and go, oh, thank you. I want to be heard. But yeah, I think that one of the key differences is, well, it's only ever one-way practice in SE. So there's only ever a therapist and a client, or a practitioner and a client. And yeah, I'm not sure it has to be that way. That's the way it's been formulated. There's that sort of one-way dimensionality of it. And so that's one difference. The other difference is in SE, I think there's a lot more emphasis on physiology, sort of how trauma affects our physiology.
Hmm.
in both in the short term and long term. And I think it has a very deep understanding of that, a very research-based understanding of that around the nervous system, polyvagal theory. And it's more, there's more and more and more coming all the
Yeah.
time. I only know a tiny piece of it, but that feels very good. It's really understanding how it affects the body and the nervous system and all the other associated systems of the body. It offers a lot to that, which focusing doesn't not that it doesn't speak to that, but it doesn't have a language, it doesn't have that sort of articulated language for. My sense and experiences, I've seen SE sessions look just like focusing, and focusing sessions look just like SE sessions. Like,
Hmm.
so in the actual experiencing piece of doing it, very often the process, there's something similar unfolds because that's really it's a human body, isn't it? It's doing its thing. So often they can look quite similar. Uh, but yeah, in terms of sort of what's taught and the range of practices and understandings, they can feel kind of alongside each other, but quite different as well. The last thing I would say is SE. SE is kind of more refined around traumatic experience and how it lives in our body, whereas focusing as we've touched on, has a much broader kind of remit isn't quite the word I'm looking for, but you can look at anything with focusing. You can look at poetry, you can look at
Yeah. Yeah.
decision making, creativity, and
Mhm.
I guess some of that stuff might unfold in SE, but it is very much refined towards helping people recover from the effects of trauma. It's more precise in that way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. It's more of a specific
mm.
kind of target.
Yeah, yeah. In a way, although of course, what happens is other yeah. I mean, when you work on any piece of one piece of experience, the rest of one's life changes. So it's never just about trauma, is it? It's
Hmm.
like yeah.
I'm curious if you think back to that experience that initiated your interest,
Mm-hmm.
SE. Would SE have been really helpful in that situation?
It's a good question. It's more. I think what SE gave me more, or most of what it gave me, was this capacity to sort of to be with those terrifying experiences
Yeah.
and not freak out.
Yeah.
Uh, that's what it gave me. I mean, it gave me more than that, but if I'd have had that, I think there are other ways of having that.
Hmm. Hmm.
But if I'd have had that, then that would have been great. So I would have been able to stay with the person and not some part of me freak out
Yeah.
and feel like I was overwhelmed, and
Yeah.
not knowing what to do and powerless and just be with it. In
Yeah.
a way, I think, like we're speaking about grief, in a way, I think trauma also, oh, well, the word trauma is a bit, but those kinds of experiences, in a way, just also need to be welcomed. They need a container to be met in, a quite strong container, I'd say. But yeah, somehow it's pretty similar. We just we don't have to do a lot to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm curious just how you use the word trauma because it's
Mm,
used so much
I
now.
know. Yeah, yeah,
And I have to confess, there's times I'm thinking when we're talking about trauma, we're actually just talking about life.
yeah, yeah. I know. That's
Um,
right.
and
That's
just
right.
that there is, of course, a physiological response to life. You don't live a moment of your life without your body
Mm,
intimately engaged in everything
yes, yes,
that's
yes.
happening.
Yeah,
So yeah, how do you understand that term? I mean, it's a big question, but how do you
yeah.
understand
It is.
the
Yeah.
term trauma?
I guess it's something around where something has happened and we haven't been able to meet, our the not just the individual, but the individual in their environment hasn't been able to meet it, and it gets stuck. It remains unresolved. I guess gender
Mhm.
would call this a stopped process, perhaps,
Mhm.
as much as I understand that. So it's come to the person but hasn't been able to flow through and
Yeah.
sort of move through. That's what's troublesome. That's what, if you like, I think that's what causes a lot of pain and suffering. If it's allowed to move through, which is as much about what's around us as what's inside of us, about the people and the context, then we recover. But if that's not there, then I guess we're left with something unresolved. And I guess that's what I'm sort of calling trauma. So it's not so much about the experience, it's more about how it lives on in us, you know.
Yeah.
So it's more unresolved trauma, you could say, is where we get troubled.
Or like unresolved experience.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, even without calling it unresolved experience. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, that unresolved experience, I can agree with that term.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
feels general and about life, and it can be about
that's right.
absolutely anything. It can be about getting
Yeah,
a scratch in your car door. It could be anything.
yeah,
But anything can have you. The response, I think you're pointing out, is the important thing, is how the
yes,
person responds to the event.
yeah, yeah,
And years ago, when I was working in a psychiatric hospital, we were working with people with trauma, and the way it was understood then was unexperienced experience,
right.
which is the same. It's
Yeah, yeah.
unresolved in some way. Yeah. Um, yeah, I'm curious whether you now integrate the two approaches, or because I imagine having had that big a training in SE, it must somehow be in you and
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
inform your focusing as well as your focusing informing it. Is that true?
Yeah, it definitely informs my focusing. I mean, I stopped offering one-to-one sessions in SE around the end of the pandemic. I guess I felt didn't have the capacity. There was just a lot going on in my personal life, and then I just didn't have to hold that. I wasn't just didn't feel I had the capacity, and I
Yeah.
felt a little bit rusty in some of the sort of methodologies. But I guess yeah, how it informs my focusing is what I spoke of earlier, which is being able to be with that terror or
Mhm.
that overwhelm or that,
Mhm.
and for it not to freak me out. I can
Yeah.
okay, yeah, we can be with this. Someone can tell me about, I don't know, an abusive situation they were in, or being scared out of their life in a car accident, and I won't freak out. I can be alongside them,
Mhm.
or I can come in a group, and hopefully I can hold that as well. It's so there's something about that's I guess that's the main something. That's something around capacity, isn't it? I guess I have some more capacity to meet it. That's how it's changed in terms of meeting it. I guess I feel I do have a few things I could draw on if it crops up.
Yeah.
Well, like specifically, I could have a few, let's call them tools, that I could bring to bear if I'm working one to one, or if it does come in a group. Some tool, yeah, around resourcing, more around just allowing, around making validation, around
Mhm.
also just around connection. I mean, there's a lot around social engagement. That's I think focusing has a lot to offer. This, that really creating safety. I guess it's around safety, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's something I haven't mentioned yet, but I think that's one of our felt sense of safety or not is one of the meeting places of focusing on SE. How do we, because safety isn't an abstract concept. It's not, you feel it or you don't, or shades between. It's
Yeah.
not something you really theorize about with somebody's body.
Mhm.
So yeah, I guess I feel I have some ways to create safety in that have come from SE
Yeah.
that I still use. Yeah.
What I'm thinking when I listen to you is kind of the confidence that it can give a person to have some knowledge
Yeah. Oh yeah, massively.
about
Yeah.
something.
Yes.
Um, yeah.
It's hugely resourcing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually to yeah, knowledge, not yeah, there's something about that, isn't it? And to know, because also when we don't know about it, it can much more easily freak us out because we don't know what's happening or why is this happening to my body, and
Hmm.
it's even more scary.
Hmm.
But when you understand more, oh, this is my nervous system and I'm getting triggered and this is happening, and it's still not a pleasant experience, but to
Yeah.
have that knowledge of why is yeah, very, very helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the teaching I do is for therapists, and
Mm.
therapists are terrified of trauma.
Yeah, right.
It's always one of the first questions that comes up when you're teaching
Yeah.
focusing is, what if you come across some trauma, then what? As though it's,
Yes.
I mean, I think it comes from a good place. People are really afraid of further harming someone,
Yes. Yeah, of course.
as though their presence and their care,
Mm.
and this is to your point, their ability simply to be with the person, no matter what the person is going through,
Hmm.
that's going to do something. It might not do everything, but it's going to do something positive for the person if you can have that.
Yeah.
But the question is, what gives a person the confidence to have that?
Yeah. Exactly. Well, that's really the important question, and I
Yeah.
think there's many things that can give people that confidence,
Yeah.
and the opposite is true is also when in a way when it that confidence is sort of compromised, let's say, like by one's own unresolved trauma, like
Hmm.
my own, then it's much harder. Yeah, of course we can't stay in the room with them, can we? We've gone as well, and
Yeah. Yeah.
and I
Exactly.
don't think that's terrible, like always a really bad thing, but it will. Well, it just shows us got some work to do. So,
Yeah.
yeah, how can I stay with them? That's what seemed important.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that, for me, it really points to the importance of having an experiential practice as a practitioner of any kind.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Yes, yeah,
I'm conscious of the time,
sure.
and I'm just curious. I feel like we've touched upon a lot of different things and probably could have spent a lot more time
Mm.
on a lot of them. But is there anything else, anything that you're kind of passionate about or interested in developing further? What's next for you?
I suppose what's still really alive. I mean, it's something we've already touched on, which is this whole area of nature and
Mhm.
connecting to that, deepening that relationship. Yeah, it feels mysterious and hard to articulate, but I feel I'm still feel very called to
Mhm.
do more of that and to take the focusing kind of attitude and sensibility and practices into that. That's what's calling me most at the moment. And yeah, so that's what's most alive, I suppose.
And
And yeah, and some of those by implication, what that might mean for talking about climate
yeah,
chaos or ecology, and it's those are kind of woven together.
and
Yeah.
is that in the form of taking people out into nature?
Yeah, yeah, both, yeah, doing that and also taking myself out there, like deepening my own practice of doing that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah, wanting to do more of that. I mean, yeah, it's limited how much time I can take away from family and work to kind of really because I want to sort of deepen that conversation. Let's say it's a conversation I've had and started, but I feel like I'm only halfway through it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I really want to return to that more deeply, and I give it more time, maybe doing a vision quest and just immersing myself in some of those practices a bit more fully.
Can I ask you, this seems like a question out of the blue,
Yeah.
but it occurred to me a while ago when you were talking about this, and this comes from my own personal experience, and it's coming back to me again now. So I'll ask it, and if you don't want to answer, that's absolutely fine.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, but I'm curious about psychedelics and the possible role
Oh, yeah.
of psychedelics in this opening up this connection to nature.
Yes.
Is that any aspect of your interest?
Oh, yeah, it is. Haven't been there for a long time. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, practically it's hard for me to make the space. I mean, I think those kinds of I don't even know medicines, let's call them,
Hmm.
need to be treated with some kind of care and respect and a kind of container, again, a container. And
Yeah.
right now I don't have a very easy way of entering those spaces. Just have a son to look after, and I can't just disappear for a couple of days and
Yeah.
often an ayahuasca ceremony quite so simply. But if yeah, definitely they've called to me and yeah, I mean I'm really glad they're being in research more.
Hmm.
I think that's a very yeah, it feels positive to me. And what's interesting, isn't it? They're what comes to me when I do this nature work is how we've co-evolved. We've co-evolved with this organism, the forest and born the forest. And so And that co-evolution has brought us, brings us everything we need,
Hmm.
all the sustenance and food we need. And then, yeah, in that incredible varied landscape, there are these plants and fungi and that affect our awareness and consciousness in very profound ways. So why did they show up?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and it feels like too good a gift to ignore. In a way, and all the other, yeah, like so many medicines have come from the natural world. Of course, I mean the more obvious medicines we use. So it seems strange to demonize them,
Hmm.
yeah, I'm definitely interested in their role in our opening our awareness and expanding our consciousness. I mean, I did a lot of psychedelics when I was younger, in my teens and 20s.
Hmm.
That was a little bit more recreational, but but definitely opened my mind. It was definitely
Yeah.
there was an awakening, an awakening that happened then. But yeah, I want to revisit that. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, psychedelics and nature go hand in hand.
Yes. Yeah.
I, yeah. But again, as you were talking, and I know we have to finish, but as you were talking, I again got this little glimpse
Mm.
of being in kind of small s spiritual territory.
Hmm.
That when we're talking about life, we're talking about evolution,
Yes.
we're talking about the manifestations that have come out of that process called evolution, which is
Mm.
one of the processes of life.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard not to begin to back up into a larger and larger perspective within which
Yes.
our beings are simply kind of temporary manifestations of something.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that somehow it all goes together. Somehow it all
Yeah.
fits.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I spent, well, many years in a more formal spiritual tradition,
Yeah.
with a Buddhist name and
Yeah.
a sort of much more obvious and sort of public kind of persona around that. And I mean, why am I saying that? I guess, yeah, what I'm discovering though is that this relationship with nature is bringing something of what I was really looking for there. A kind of sense of being, of belonging to something bigger,
Hmm.
but not just belonging, participating in, or being of. I mean, the words start to become a bit hard to use in a way, but yeah, what one would call spiritual, I think, is what I meet in when I go to the forest.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the thing that I'm getting is that
Yeah.
it has a very palpable
Mm,
connection. It's not something abstract. It's
no.
something that's very concrete somehow.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you very much. I've
Thank
really
you.
appreciated this. And yeah, good luck with the book.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, me too, Greg. It's been a rich conversation. Thanks. Good.
Okay.
All right.
Bye
Thank
for
you.
now.
Bye for now. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.